The headline is the church continues to grow. Last year, at this meeting this exact meeting, last February, the headline here was the church is growing. It was kind of an astounding season of growth, 43% growth. When I kind of put that number out for fellow pastors and friends, their jaws dropped and eyes widened. It's not normal. It's an abnormal season of growth. What I said last year at this time that I want to say again is even though the church is growing, numbers are not the goal. Okay, that's not the primary goal. Is not numbers. And by the way, in your handout, your agenda, we have blanks. I'm just helping you follow along here. Numbers are not the goal, and I just want to make that very clear. When we talk about numbers, as especially those of us who are more analytically minded or engineer minded, numbers are extremely tangible. And in ministry, many, many things are intangible. So when you start looking at numbers, it's a lot easier to get hyper-focused on the numbers and lose track of the things you're actually supposed to be thinking about. So that leads me into, I just have a little devotional time here for just a little bit, just to set the context, set our hearts in the right area. What is our goal? Well, Paul gives it to Timothy in 1 Timothy chapter 1, and I'm just going to excerpt from a great passage, just this 2 verses. The aim of our charge, leaders, the aim of our charge is love. And that's the aim. It's love. Love, a specific kind of love. Okay? So it's not just airy-fairy, sentimental feeling of love and affection, though that's part of it. It's a specific kind of love. It's a love that issues from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. And there's my 3-point sermon. A pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith. And he says, certain persons, by swerving from these 3 things, love that issues from a pure heart, good conscience, and sincere faith. So by swerving from a pure heart, good conscience, and sincere faith, certain persons who he's going to name in the Bible, he's going to call them out by name. Certain persons, by swerving from these 3 things, have wandered away into vain discussion. So that tells me as a leader, that tells me as a pastor, that if I swerve from a pure heart, a good conscience, and a sincere faith, the things I am going to be talking about will be vanity or temporary, meaningless, ineffective, not the goal. So love that issues from a pure heart, good conscience, and sincere faith. I think each one of those 3, pure heart, good conscience, and sincere faith, each of those 3 have content to them. I'm going to show my age a little bit. This is a zip file of a lot of information. Each one of these 3 phrases, pure heart, good conscience, sincere faith, is orange juice concentrate. So let's add a little water for a second. Pure heart. This is one that's most simple. It's the most simple. It just means no alloyed motives. And if you read the epistles, you see Paul and Peter and others excoriating, that's a big word, really, really yelling hard at, really chewing out, wishing they would emasculate themselves level. Those who do not have a pure heart, those who have ulterior motives in leadership. So to me, this is a huge warning that if I'm leading the charge, which is part of my job description, if I'm leading the charge with anything other than a pure heart, then I'm in deep trouble. I'm in deep trouble with the Lord. And that is something that I fear more than anything else on this planet. Pure heart toward what? Pure heart to glorify God. I would say there's all kinds of things you could put under pure what, but I would say glorify God. At the end of the day, in your ministry, you're going to stand before the Lord and give an account for the ministry work that you did. Are you going to be able to stand before Him with a good heart, with a clear conscience? And the way that you're going to be able to stand before Him with a clear conscience is by having a pure heart in ministry. A pure heart is to love people, help them know and love Jesus. That's what we're here to do. So all the talk about numbers, all the talk about strategies, all the talk about logistics, all of that needs to flow from a pure heart, a heart to help accomplish the mission, come alongside the Lord in what He's doing in our world. Pure heart, not selfish gain. There's a lot of negatives given in A lot of negatives given in the scriptures on what the opposite of a pure heart is. And it largely has to do with self-aggrandizement, self-glorification, and selfish motive, selfish gain. Ministry cannot be about you. Ministry can't be about me. Ministry can't be about your reputation. Ministry can't be about your identity being fulfilled. Ministry, there's lots of ways that we can have an impure heart in ministry. And I think that for those of us who are actually filled with the Spirit, where we typically stumble is that we tend to idolize ministry and we make it about ourselves instead of about the people that we are serving. So lots to be said there. Many of you know what I'm saying already. Just wanted to remind us of it. A pure heart is what's going to give rise to a clear conscience on the day of the Lord. 1 Corinthians 4, you should write that down. If you don't already dwell with some frequency on 1 Corinthians 3 and 4, you ought to, as a leader. There is an incredible sermon, probably I would say at this point, the most important sermon I've heard in my life on 1 Corinthians 4 by Tim Keller called The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness. And I just ordered 25 copies of the print version of that because they were super cheap. And I've been waiting for an opportunity to do that. And I would love to be able to hand them out to those of you who would be blessed by that. There's audio version of it as well. But in 1 Corinthians 3 and 4, Paul is correcting the Corinthians church making pop stars of ministry leaders. So it does two things at the same time. It corrects congregations from idolizing their leaders, and it corrects leaders from acting like they're rock stars. And the thing that he says there, it's the passage where you're probably very familiar. Some of you say, I follow Paul. Some of you say, I follow Apollos. Well, who is Paul? Who is Apollos? I'm paraphrasing here, so I apologize. We're nothing. We're nothing. Paul, Apollos, and if you were there and those names like Billy Graham, who's that? Nobody. Workers in the harvest. What do? We just plant seeds and we just water. Any growth that happens in ministry, it comes from God. It comes from God. That's where the growth comes from. It's from God. We're nothing. We just plant seeds. You know how boring planting seeds is unless you really love gardening and have the anticipation of what's to come? Planting a seed is the most anticlimactic event I think that humans can do. Take a seed, put it in the ground, cover it with dirt. The end. Now what? Now we wait. See what happens. Next week you go out and water it. Well, I don't know. I'm not a gardener, so it might be tomorrow. I don't know. You water it right away. I know that part, depending on the kind of seed. Nancy could give better clarity on those examples. We plant seeds. We water. God gives the growth. And then he says, but, he says one thing, we're nothing. And on the other hand, then he says, we're co-laborers with God. So in the same breath, he says, we're nothing. And then he says like this statement, co-workers with God? Like that's a big deal. Like I get to work with God. I'm God's, ministry partner in a sense. He's working through me. So it's an interesting dual, like simultaneous I'm nothing, and also my job is really, really important. Your task, leaders, is extremely noble. Extremely noble. You get to work alongside God in what he's doing. Just realize that the work you do is planting and watering. He's the one that gives the growth. So when we talk about numbers and we talk about growth, there is some reality too. We're doing a faithful job. That's awesome, but it's God that's doing the work. We asked reasons why the growth. Why is the growth happening? We identified 9 mechanical reasons, things that we think we've started to doing in the last several years that have kind of helped us get out of the way of ourselves and God doing work. But at the end of the day, the reason for our growth in the last 3 years is God decided to grow this church for some reason. And he could have just as easily theoretically decided to not, but he decided to. So what's our job? 1 Corinthians 4 goes on to say, here's how you should think of us. We're stewards. We are just stewards of God's mysteries. We're stewards. You should think of us leaders. You should think of yourselves. Congregants, you should think of your leaders. We're just stewards. We've been handed a task by a master to do. We're stewards. And then he says, what is the job of a steward? And he says, it's to be found faithful. Found faithful in a task that they were given to do. So the question is not like, are we doing all the work correctly? The question is, and like, are we doing it like Are we performing to a high level such that the product will happen? The question is, are we being faithful with the task we've been given by the Lord to do? Are we being found faithful? And then he goes on from there, and this is where a clear conscience comes into play. He goes on from there and he says, now for me it is a very small matter that I should be judged by you or any human court. So in the matter of faithfulness, am I being faithful or not? Where do I get my feedback on whether or not I am being faithful in ministry? And the answer for Paul is not from you or any human court, not from you. I'm not concerned with your feedback. I'm concerned, he says, I'm not even concerned with my own feedback. I'm not even concerned with what my heart is telling me about how I'm doing. That's really weird. He does say, though, my conscience is clear. So that's the one thing Paul has to navigate on. He talks about a clear conscience in a lot of different places. It seems like Paul, the way he navigated on whether he was doing a good job or not, was whether his conscience was clear about stewardship with the charge his master handed him. It says, when I stand, if the Lord were standing before me right now, which he always is, and were to give me an accounting of my work, would I be able to stand there with a clear conscience? That's a great daily morning sort of question when you're asking yourself about your leadership in the church. Can I stand before the Lord with a clear conscience and say, Lord, I think I'm being faithful with what you've given me to do? And understand that the Lord is going to say more or less yes, or like, hey, we need to change some things. He's going to give you one of those two answers. Interestingly, he says, my conscience is clear. And then he says, but that doesn't mean I'm innocent. He says, I might be wrong about my clear conscience. That even my clear conscience isn't necessarily an indicator that I'm being faithful. Okay, so how does he know that if it's not the judgment, it's not feedback from others, if it's not his internal own conscience, what is it? And he goes, I'm waiting for the judgment day. I'm waiting for judgment day. I'm going to be faithful as I can with as clear of a conscience as I can have, with as pure a heart as I can have, and as sincere of a faith as I can have on this planet. And then I'm going to wait for judgment day. Now, even that judgment day thing can be a little scary, can't it? Like, what if on that day I find out I've been doing this all wrong to begin with? What if I found out that I was off in a pretty significant area of ministry? What if I missed the Lord's leading and have been leading this church astray for the last 15 years, and then I'm facing judgment? Last 50 years, and then I face judgment. Well, that's a scary thought. I'm going to sit in that for just a second. The Lord says, for the last 50 years, you've been leading this church in the wrong direction. I had something else for you instead. Now, if you were like Hymenaeus and Alexander, wandering away into vain discussions, meaning not a pure heart, not a good conscience, not a sincere faith, and we'll get to what sincere faith is in a second, then it would have been better if you would have tied a millstone around your neck and thrown yourself into the ocean than stand there in front of God on Judgment Day. But if you're navigating out of a pure heart, desire to please the Lord, desire to preach his gospel and help other people know and love Jesus, if your conscience was clear in the meantime and you're operating out of a sincere faith, and I want to quantify that, like I said, just a second. It's the last part I'm going to talk about. If you're operating out of those things, you're going to stand before the Lord Jesus Christ, and your record of perfection in ministry is going to be put on the table. This is Revelation 20. Your record of perfection in ministry is going to be put on the table, and you're going to get a D. You're going to have some points. You're going to have a lot of mess ups. But the really, really cool thing is that the grade you're going to get is not based on your book. It's not based on your record book. It's based on Jesus' record book. And Jesus' record book is flawless. And on Judgment Day, when you're standing before the judgment seat of Christ, giving an account for the ministry that you did, if you are operating out of a sincere desire, a pure desire to please the Lord, help people know him, operating out of a sincere faith, your judgment is going to be, I'm just declaring to you right now, your judgment on Judgment Day is going to be, well done, good and faithful servant. Enter the joy of your master. Your record book in ministry is going to be thrown in the lake of fire, and you get to have Jesus' record book. That's Revelation 20 in a very small nutshell. You get to enter the joy of your master on the basis of Jesus' work, and I'd rather have that grade. I don't care what my grade is on this planet. I'm going to have that grade. That is a very, very comforting thought in ministry when you're struggling with doubt about whether you're heading in the right direction. But Paul gives us 3 things to navigate by here. A pure heart. Are you out for personal gain? Or are you out to please the Lord and help other people know him and please him? Do you have a good conscience? Or do you know, you got this nagging sense, something is up, and other people are telling me something is up and I need to pay attention to it? Good consciences, by the way, I think are community projects. This is not an individualistic, isolationist sort of idea. If somebody is telling you something is up, you should listen. 1 Corinthians 4 says, being judged by you is a very small matter. But if I have a lot of people telling me, Matt, you're off, I should pay attention to that. Not in the sense of, well, I'm being judged, but in the sense of, I want to have a clear conscience, and these people are indicating to me that I need to rethink it. Clear conscience is a community project. Sincere faith. Sincere faith is a loaded phrase. The word faith in the scriptures has content behind it. It doesn't mean the Disney, like, just believe in your heart and, like, whatever your dreams are, they'll come true. Sincere faith means that you are clinging to the historic Christian faith as passed down from our fathers from the beginning with accuracy. So accurate theology is wrapped up in this sincere faith. Accuracy is important. You're not allowed to invent new stuff. That's where everybody goes wrong. That's where Hymenaeus and Alexander shipwrecked themselves. It's a sincere hanging on to the faith. Now, sincerity in the faith means that you actually believe it. You actually are banking your life on it. You're actually living your life according to it. So this is, I believe in the historic real Jesus. I believe in the real Jesus, the one that the church has been handing down for 2,000 years. And I'm doing that because I love him and I want other people to know him. Sincere faith. And I have a pure heart in doing that. I'm not doing that because it gets me credit, and I'm not doing that because it helps me feel good about my personal identity. I'm not doing that for any monetary gain especially. I'm doing it because this is what he wants me to do, and I want to please him. And I have a good conscience in doing that. That's our goal. Not numbers. Love that issues from these 3 things. So I wanted to just start there.